All right. Hi, Facebook.
Hi.
I'm here with Elizabeth Nielson. I'm Ingmar Gorman, and we're here today to talk a little bit about the Psychedelic Education and Continuing Care Program at the Center for Optimal Living. I'm currently the director of the program. I'm also a psychologist at the center, and we started this program a few years ago and really haven't had a chance to interact with the online Facebook community. We thought this would be a good time to do so. Maybe we could start by you maybe telling us a little bit about your background, Elizabeth, and then I'll introduce myself after that.
Okay, we'll do some introductions. My name is Elizabeth Nielson, and I'm also a psychologist. Where to start? I'm actually a recent addition to the Center for Optimal Living's clinical team here. I came on board about 6 months ago as a psychologist and clinician, and here at the center I see patients for private individual psychotherapy, and we'll very soon be starting a group, which we'll get to in a minute because it's related to the psychedelic program. Outside of Center for Optimal Living, I work at NYU and I'm part of the psychedelic research team there. So I've been the last couple of years involved in the trial of psilocybin assisted psychotherapy for alcohol use disorder, and will soon be for the MDMA trial for PTSD, although for the purposes of this presentation, I'm not representing NYU. I'm just talking about my private work here at Optimal Living and the Psychedelic Harm Reduction and Education Program, which for me was a very interesting point of coming to Center for Optimal Living in order to have an opportunity to be able to start integrating some of the principles and theories of psychedelic therapy into both harm reduction work around psychedelics and integration work, and making those available to the community in some way. Psychedelic therapy, as we practice it in the clinical trials, is not available to the public at this time, but there are certain principles and aspects that I think are useful to have on board and accessible and available to people in the general community.
And so when we learned about Elizabeth, myself and Andrew, and learned about what Elizabeth was doing out in the research field and her clinical background, it was just an absolute logical step to have her join us on the team.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say a few words just about the psychedelic program for those who may be unfamiliar with it. It's something that we started now over 2 years ago, been in existence, and it was really a creation in response to what we saw as a lack of knowledge and training and psychotherapy, the lack of the availability of those things to the general public. So we kind of imagined somebody who may have had a psychedelic experience outside of the research setting, whether it was recreationally or for therapeutic intentions, and they may not have somebody who they could turn to. So we thought that it would be great to create a program that would allow people to reach to us and either seek psychotherapy, or in the case of somebody who was maybe a mental health professional, to obtain education. So our full name is the Psychedelic Education and Continuing Care Program. And it's a very long name, but this is sort of the meaning that's contained in it is one, education, so education for the public, but as I just mentioned, education for professionals, mental health professionals who want to work with clients who may be using psychedelics. It's also education for people who use psychedelics. And continuing care, that word, that phrase encapsulates more than just, we wanted to highlight the fact that working with us in psychotherapy would be an ongoing, or could potentially be an ongoing process, that we're not just interested in your psychedelic experience as a single contained experience, but we want to know about that experience, but also what led up to that experience, and supporting a person's development, their well-being over the course of time. So to continue to care for somebody. So that was our intention, and we've actually managed to build something, and it's going quite successfully for the last 2 years. And one of the latest additions to the services that we provide beyond this training and education and individual psychotherapy is also group therapy. And this is something that now Elizabeth is bringing to the program as a new service. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
I'll unpack a couple of things here. People who are joining us live or watching this later may be aware that the psychedelic education continuum care program here had for a long time as a principal component a publicly available open integration group that was run about once a month, and those groups were open to the public, or something people could sign up for, and they were lovely. They really were meant to and did provide a space for a lot of people to be able to come together and share experiences and receive in a supportive environment. We recently, with some transitions to the program, are transitioning to offering a weekly psychotherapy group. And there's a difference in focus there. I'll be offering that. It starts in 2 weeks, and it'll be an ongoing weekly group. So it'll have the same people more or less every week, unless somebody is absent, but a consistent base of group members that get to know each other and form relationships. And just like a regular psychotherapy group, support each other and challenge each other nicely, and help each other work through whatever they're dealing with. So it's an opportunity to be engaged, in a dynamic relationship with others. That group is it's not for everyone, and we don't mean to suggest that everyone that is has some interaction with psychedelics needs to be in psychotherapy. But there are people who, either struggle with the experiences that they've had, or are, considering using psychedelics in a way that would interact with a difficult experience that they've had. And there's just a lot of different potential relationships that one could have with psychedelics, where they would actually want, to be in a room with a clinician and have somebody that can help them identify potential risks, potential interactions, and unpack those things in a safe space with the support of somebody who's licensed and trained. Especially, so many people these days just have complexities with other things going on in life, home, other situations. So we want to offer that for those that need it.
So I wanted to, I think it's what you said about psychedelics and psychotherapy is really important, because I don't know if this is something that we've ever really kind of made explicit as a psychedelic program, that we don't think that just because somebody has a psychedelic experience, they necessarily need to be in psychotherapy. So I think it's really important that we just kind of make that known.
I think you're right, and that's consistent. It's very important to make that known. It's consistent with the overall harm reduction approach of the center, which is that each individual, in brief, has their own unique relationship with any substance that they're using, and some of those relationships are problematic and others are not. And it's not our job to kind of go in with a schedule of preset ideas. It's our place really to help people explore those relationships and learn from them, and be supportive when there isn't a need.
You had mentioned a little bit about what will be kind of maybe unique or important about the group that you're going to be running. I'm wondering, so somebody might say, well, I have friends that I can speak to about my experiences. Why should I, or why should somebody come to a psychotherapy group?
I would say that for the most part, people who have peer support and are getting what they need through peer support, or through the support of, perhaps they used a psychedelic as part of a religious ceremony, of some kind of shamanic ceremony, are getting the support through whatever structure that is, and that's fine. That's wonderful. There are many other structures, and people can and do get, the support that they need through those structures. It's probably more of an exception that someone would say, I think there's something deeper going on here, and I really need I needed to be in a room with a psychotherapist about this. I can make sort of a broad-based example. Let's say that someone uses a psychedelic in any setting, really, and it brings up some difficult memories. And those really come to the surface in a new way, perhaps some really intense emotional experiences, and I've kind of talked to people about it in their community or in their group, and really still feels like it's lingering, and it's continuing to be something that they'd like to explore further. So that would be a time that somebody might call and say, hey, I think I need a little bit more help integrating this, or I haven't been feeling, so I've been feeling a little depressed after an experience, or, it's stirring things up in a way that I'd like some additional help and support.
I liked what you had mentioned about the relationships, because what maybe makes a group, because you and I we're trained psychologists, so we sort of, this may be common knowledge to us and it may be assumption that we're making, but maybe it's something that our audience may not be familiar with, like the distinction between a psychotherapy group and a drop-in group, or just going to a meetup, right? And one of the things that you had mentioned is the relationships. So the commitment to going to a group once a week is not just because, well, that's just a rule. It's there because it's not, you're engaged in your own sort of healing therapeutic process, but you're also engaged in that process with other people. And your presence and your relationship to those people sort of mutually enriching. And in a way, a person's absence from that kind of takes away from that process. And your role as the therapist there is to sort of facilitate these multiple relationships that are going on, with all of the sort of the focused aim on kind of helping everybody improve in their own way. So it's a very sort of intensive process that happens between a smaller group of people. It's not like there's 25 people. It's not a lecture. It's not a class. It's a deeply personal, connected process.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's happened. I mean, I know that from the 60s and 70s, when people were given psychedelics, there were group psychotherapies that were sort of connected to that. And I want to just emphasize that we're not giving anybody psychedelics here at this program. That's not something that we can do. But don't call us for psychedelic doses. But what you are offering is pretty unique. I don't know if there's any other place that has done sort of a psychedelic harm reduction or psychedelic integration group therapy in a long time, or is doing it presently. I think it's maybe one of the first.
Well, so again, just like the psychotherapy relationship is unique, and many people watching this have probably been in psychotherapy, so your relationship with your therapist is a unique space. It's a space that's dedicated to you. That person is present to be there and listen to you. You don't have to fulfill the same kinds of norms and social obligations that you do when you call your sister or your mom or your best friend and tell them about it, and then at the end of the conversation you have to worry about the effect on them, the impact on your relationship, and whether or not they're going to tell you your aunt, your uncle, and your brother, or post it on Facebook. It's a very unique and protected relationship, and it's like no other, really. The psychotherapist and patient relationship, and so in the group relationship, you have that, and you also have this unique relationship with other people in the group who, again, are there as part of a process. They're there to support each other, and sometimes politely, gently challenge each other within the norms of the group, but see each other through things in a way that you don't have with your peers or your friends, because they're in a different role in your life. These are people you're not going to see outside of the group. You're not going to get together with them for family reunions or parties or things like that, hopefully. And one of the main principles that I like to touch on about group psychotherapy, and it's like this most simple kind of thing that I think really describes why it's so unique, is that one of the ways that group psychotherapy is thought to work is that people tend to sort of recreate a lot of the patterns that they have outside in the real world within the psychotherapy group, and play those out again. So the same sort of relational patterns and the same interpersonal dynamics, but in the group it's a safe place to explore those, check them them out, see how they're working, and maybe practice changing them within that context of these really unique relationships. So it becomes kind of like a blank canvas, you could say, into which everyone walks and interacts with each other, and then creates something that is really quite unique. And I think that adding to the two ideas of psychedelic harm reduction and integration work and the psychotherapy group together, we're going to get some really, really unique stuff and some really rich material and interesting processes. As far as being historical, I think this is pretty new for as far as what's going on currently these days in a psychotherapist's office. The idea of holding a psychotherapy harm reduction integration group by a licensed clinician is we don't know of any others. We'd love to, though. If you know of one and you're running one, tell us. But I think it is pretty unique. There was a lot of group psychedelic therapy with psychedelic therapists back in the 60s taking psychedelics with their groups of patients taking psychedelics together, groups of patients working through the integration together and all of that. That is not the case right now in the research. The general format for psychedelic therapy in the research is to have a co-therapist, male-female co-therapist team working with one patient at a time. There is, I think, a little bit of research either in the planning stage or underway to do a very small group setting to sort of test that model, but it's not the norm. So most people who go through psychedelic therapy in the research settings, by and large, don't ever have the benefit of a peer group or potential benefit of a peer group to discuss those experiences with.
I think I don't know what stage it's at currently, but there's a plan for, I think at UCLA, not UCLA, the UCSF, yes, so, Brian Anderson, they were talking about incorporating not a group psychedelic experience, but rather kind of group integration or group conversation after psychedelic experiences for individuals who've lost or who are grieving the loss of somebody who died from HIV/AIDS, or they've been sort of depressed or mourning that loss for a long time. But that's really the exception, and I'm not sure what stage that's in currently. I noticed that actually when we informed Facebook about us doing this live video, that we would take questions from the audience. And we have a question here from somebody. Right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. So somebody asks us, is this only available to people that can physically attend the group, or is there going to be an online group for others all over the country? Would you like to, well, should I take that piece? Or, okay. Well, so I want to speak maybe even more. Well, I'd like you to respond on the group piece maybe, but I can speak to this question from a larger perspective, which is that because what we're doing with the psychedelic program is relatively uncommon or not really available to a lot of people across the country. There are a lot of people all over the US who would like our help. And this has been, it's in some ways very difficult for us because we don't want to turn anybody down, but there are actually limitations on our licensing to be able to work with people out of state. And so either individually or in a group context. So if somebody even reaches out to us individually from, say, Washington, D.C., or from California, or from anywhere.
Or even from Connecticut.
Or even from
like 5 miles away.
Right, or New Jersey, yep. Which is Jersey, right across. Right. So it's, unfortunately, because we're in New York City, we can't really always provide even telemedicine. There are some states where there's some maybe exceptions and some limits to maybe having 1 or 2 sessions, but in terms of an ongoing therapeutic work, we're really, really limited. So what we do is whenever somebody reaches out to us and is looking for help, we try to connect the person to a provider within their state. And our network of people who we can refer to is constantly growing. And in the context of not psychotherapy groups, not clinical work, but more in the vein of sort of public groups or meetups, there are psychedelic societies. Those are popping up every day for peer support. For true psychotherapy support, we're quite limited to New York. I don't know if there's anything that you would add or.
Yes, well, let's just, who asked this? Helen, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so if someone is at a point where they actually need to talk to a psychotherapist about their psychedelic experience, it's probably pretty important that they are able to do that with someone in person. I would feel more comfortable with that, certainly. I know that, I could do, for instance, phone therapy or telemedicine with somebody that I have an established working relationship and know, but especially for that initial evaluation and in terms of that person's safety, it is really important that they be evaluated by a local clinician face-to-face in person. That being said, in many areas, I'm sure it is a challenge to find a clinician who's going to be informed about various potential relationships one could have with psychedelic medicines, various different uses and approaches, and give somebody more than just a very basic assessment for persisting effects of the psychedelic drugs. So, we do want to, hopefully, some of the other efforts of this program will be contributing to educating clinicians about basics about working with people who are seeking help surrounding a psychedelic experience, do need to see a clinician, but do need to see somebody who is, has at least more tools for working with it. So I know that last year the program ran a day-long workshop. It was, Psychedelics 101 for clinicians. Mm-hmm. And we hope to be able to do something like that again soon. I'd love for us to have more resources, especially even online resources. We could theoretically do an online training for clinicians that could then be educated in various, all across the globe if we wanted to, but we can't actually provide psychotherapy services that way.
We can even provide training for non-clinicians too.
We can provide training for non-clinicians. So, for instance, leading a peer support group, those kinds of things. I know that the program has done before I joined. So those are other kinds of things that we can do. But as far as providing actual clinical services, we're very limited in that. And in some ways, I agree with those limits because I think that people do need a face-to-face local evaluation in a lot of cases.
We have two more questions. One is just how often does the group meet? And so this is the group that now Elizabeth is starting. Mm-hmm. So that's a weekly meeting. That's a weekly commitment. So it's every Monday?
It's every Monday. It's going to be Monday evenings, 5:45. It'll start in 2 weeks. Anybody who is interested and feels that it might be appropriate for them can email us, send a message through the center Facebook page. We'll get it. We'll have a phone call. Everybody who's in the group is going to have an initial individual face-to-face evaluation appointment with me, and that's a two-way street. That's both for me to help make a determination about the need and appropriateness for the group, but also for people to ask questions and learn more about it and see if they feel like it's the right fit for them.
This question is an interesting one, actually, that I've touches on a conversation that I've been having with somebody. So the question is, what can therapists in the broader medical field learn from the numerous indigenous traditions that have developed safe spaces for experiencing and integrating these medicines, psychedelics, that have been refined and developed for hundreds of years? Maybe they know more about integration than we do. And so there are, I guess, multiple angles in terms of how to answer this question. I've been having a conversation with Bia Labate, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, mm-hmm. And Labache, I think. So about this conversation about what is integration, and we say here, Elizabeth and I are saying that we provide integration, and it's not something that's really well written about outside of the context of the clinical trials, meaning integration outside of the context of somebody actually getting a psychedelic with a therapist. And that causes all sorts of problems, I think, for us. But what Elizabeth and I will be working on over the course of the next few months, year, is to actually make more literature available about what integration is exactly. And I think there is an important difference between the context in which we're working in, which is from the United States, the Western context, and not to say that there's Western versus non-Western, but sort of we could say the U.S. versus, let's say, indigenous cultures. They're very, very, very different cultures, very different places. And what somebody has told me, who is much more well versed in the idea of indigenous psychedelic use, she had said that they don't do integration. And now I don't know if that's true or not, but the way that I understand that, it's that there isn't a need for integration, not because they're somehow enlightened peoples, but because the culture, the context in which they're using these plants, that context, there's been a place for that use in that culture for many, 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 many years. And so the reason why I think, and we think, that integration is important in the context that we're operating in is because we don't have that context. So the context, when somebody says, well, I've taken psilocybin, the response that a person can get is, well, that's going to make you go crazy, or there's something wrong with you morally for engaging in this sort of, hedonic, reckless activity. It may be to shame you. We don't have that structure, the societal cultural structure, to contain and help a person process this experience that we may not even have received the stories or the education about, or the right stories, maybe you could say, the right education, the right information. Whereas I would imagine that for many indigenous peoples, this is something that is just built into the community. And so that's why I think there is a difference between integration. But the way that an indigenous community integrates may not be the same the way that we integrate, and maybe they don't even have to integrate. And again, not because they're supernatural or enlightened, but because it just sort of already exists there. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think great question, Vincent. Thank you so much for bringing this up. In cultures where there is a very different, drastically different, somewhat different existing relationship to psychedelics, the entire culture has a different relationship to them. What is needed or what is expected or what people's experiences are likely to be distinctly different, and their needs are likely to be dramatically different from people who are coming to this, the kinds of people that we're working with, who, by and large have a mainstream American Western worldview culture, and these experiences are, foreign and have all kinds of potential baggage and meaning. So that, we know that I think that cultural relationship in general becomes part of the setting in which it determines, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the idea of set and setting. So that cultural relationship determines in some way what the person's set is going to be, what their mental set going into the experience is going to be, what their expectations are, and then what the setting is. We're not, this is not something that is, legal, condoned, or even available in our mainstream American society these days. So those things are going to really affect what integration is. And for our part, we have some experience with this. We're figuring it out also as we go, and I think that hopefully we'll have clearer ideas as we move forward. But I look forward to this being a very very sort of dynamic and interesting field because it is so unknown.
And, this is not to belabor the point, but Andrew Tatarski had told me, we were having a conversation. He says, in some cultures, if a person uses, say, ayahuasca, their grandmother or mother may say, how was your experience? How was your journey, or what have you? If we think about that question in our culture, the mom asking the young adults or their son or daughter, how was your ayahuasca experience or your psilocybin experience? It's not like, we laugh at it because it's not typical. It's not what we
I'm laughing
expect.
as my mom would.
Yeah, for some, within some families, right, that's normalized, but not in all. So we have. We have another, I think, a really great question. We have only a few more minutes left, but this is a great question, which is, what would be considered peer support in contrast to an integration circle? So what would be superior in terms of a group or circle? What would be the difference between a peer support and a licensed professional? And I think we were having a conversation about this a little bit in terms of, there's many differences, but one thing that I can think of is the responsibility that a licensed professional has to the people in the group, right?
Yeah. Okay, so might get in trouble here. So I'm sure there are many differences, and there may be some overlap. There will be overlap. There's not two totally divergent ideas: the peer support group and the group with a licensed professional. But one of the things that is really important to remember is that when you're in the care of a licensed professional, you are in the care of a licensed professional, and that licensed professional has theoretically, in our cases at least, many years of training and education, as well as licensing process, and with all of that come ethical and legal obligations to protect your safety, your confidentiality and privacy, your information, to, for instance, say something to the state if they learn that a child is being harmed in some way, to reach out and do something about it if they learn that you are in danger of hurting yourself or someone else in certain pretty narrowly defined ways. But still, there are those sort of protections and standards. Your conversation with a licensed professional is confidential. I
think that's particularly relevant when we're talking about.
It's particularly relevant when you're talking about people wanting support and guidance and help around something that may be that you may have done or may be considering doing, that does have such potential legal repercussions. Licensed professionals carry malpractice insurance. If something should, go wrong or something, there should be some issue there, that person has some protections in place, and those things are meant to protect you, to keep you safe. We're covered by a board that has lots of sort of strict rules about what we can and cannot do in order to get into this to this role, and it's a valuable thing. That said, it's not necessary or appropriate for everyone, and plenty of people have experiences that they're fine with and safe sharing with others, in other roles. But it is an important thing to keep in mind, that distinction.
And you also touched upon this a little bit in your explanation of what psychotherapy had asked you. Why not just talk to friends? Why come to a psychotherapy group? And in some ways, it's nice to be able to keep your friends as friends and have your therapist and that unique group as something else, because I think we're sometimes motivated to, say if I were talking about talking to a friend about their psychedelic experience, there may be certain things that I may be motivated to not tell them, or because I want to protect their emotions, or maybe protect my relationship with them in certain ways, or maybe I would share some things about my personal life that which is appropriate in a friendship relationship, but would be really confusing if your therapist began to tell you about something that is more about them than is about sort of you and your therapeutic process. And so I think in a peer support group, it's more about relationships that border on a kind of friendship, or that can be more personal in a different kind of way. Where here, the rules are a little bit more refined in some ways, or defined in some ways, and that in a way can kind of preserve the focus of the work.
Yeah, your therapist is not your peer. They're not supposed to be. They're not your friend. They're your professional who's there to care for you, and they are obligated in certain ways to do that, and hopefully, theoretically, should do that, even if it's challenging or difficult, or means doing something that you don't want them to necessarily do. And I hate to kind of start making up scenarios, but your therapist's primary obligation is your health, safety, and well-being. That's not necessarily true of your peers and your friends and anyone else, although we presume that all of those people are looking out for us and probably are as best they can. But in a psychotherapy relationship, you really do have some assurance of that.
I think we have to wind down.
We can do this again, though.
Yeah, we can do it again. There's an important question about access to healthcare that I don't want to just neglect or ignore. But the short answer to accessibility is to these services. We're doing everything that we can to make it accessible. So that means, I know in terms of the different organizations that are working on evolving psychedelic therapy proper, they're very much trying to pay attention to how this could be something that is accessible. And in terms of our work, we try to train other mental health professionals to provide the service, to be able to provide better services around psychotherapy and psychedelics, so that more people can provide this service, and more people could get access to it who may otherwise not be able to. But I'd like to do this again, and maybe we could start off with that question.
We could start off with that question, and I want to add to your response, which is wonderful. And yes, it's true, because there's only two of us. We can really only see a few people a week, each of us, and we really try to be as available as we can. However, psychedelic therapy is not something that has been demonstrated to be effective by the standards that meet the standards of our FDA at this time. Many of us presume that it will likely meet those standards at some point in the near future, but we're not there yet, and so we can't come to the conclusion that this is something that people should be doing, and there should be more access. We're in the middle. The research is in the middle of a process right now, and that process can feel slow, but it is there to hopefully theoretically make things safer and healthier for all of us and to protect us.
Yeah. So people are working 24/7, working very hard to make sure that this therapy is evaluated properly, and
that by that process it will become more available to. Just much more available and much more easily accessible. I know that there's many people think way ahead. It's really kind of amazing.
Right.
The forethought that goes on. It's we can talk about that maybe next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll probably put up another. This will be recorded and posted most likely, and I'm sure we'll do something like this soon again, seeing the really wonderful response. So thank you everybody for tuning in.